reminisce a bit, walk a bit down memory lane yesterday as we heard from members of the House on the other side of the aisle expressing repeatedly a desire to have open debate and not shut off debate. And reminiscing took me back to a time last year when, as far as we could find, the only time in American history, one party in the United States Congress physically prevented another party from coming to the floor and going into session and trying to begin debate and trying to discuss the business of the day. We can't find that any party ever staged such a sit-in. We know there are House rules about not eating on the House floor, about not having things to drink on the House floor other than water, and yet our friends across the aisle, eating, drinking. It's actually a violation of the House rules to sing on the House floor. Every now and then there's a violation, people look the other way, but certainly to take pictures, broadcast. And I approached the Sergeant-at-Arms and asked him why this wasn't stopped, and I was told, well, they won't stop. We've told them repeatedly. And I said, well, you won't let Republicans get away with this kind of conduct. They're preventing debate. They're preventing a session from starting timely. This has been going on for hours. And I was told, well, Congressman, when we tell you Republicans that you're violating a rule, you stop and you follow the rules. But we've told them repeatedly, and they will not stop violating the rules. They will not stop preventing you from going into session, so we don't know what else to do. Well, I had issues like that when I was a felony judge, and they didn't last long because we had bailiffs that would drag people out and stop such conduct, inappropriate. And it just seemed that in this, potentially the last bastion of civility where we can use words and debate issues, it's rather ironic, to say the least, to be preached to repeatedly about the desire for open debate and the desire to not be shut down from speaking, when that's exactly what happened last year by the very people who were standing up, and some of them reading a script pointing out how offended they were by being prevented by the rules under which we have been proceeding from going forward and debating. So rather ironic, rather incredible, actually. I also recalled back when we were debating Obamacare, and some of us wanted to get amendments into Obamacare. And of course, some of us remember the fact that John Dingell was chairman of Energy and Commerce that had jurisdiction over the health care debate and health care bill. And he's been working for health care bill, something like what passed, for all of his time, as I'm aware of, in the House. And I was told by someone that his father may have worked for the same bill for years. So that was something that was going to be a crowning glory for an incredibly honorable man. We see differently on many issues, but I know him to be an honest, honorable man. His word has always been good. When he's given it, it was always the way it is. I have great respect for him. And anyway, because he understood that the cap and trade bill that was being pushed here in the House by then Speaker Pelosi was going to unduly harm the nation's poor more than anybody else in the country. If you're very rich, you're on Wall Street, you're friends of the Obama administration, and you've gotten $656 million in grants to open a non-carbon-based energy facility. You know, you're not worried about the price of anything because your friends in the Obama administration were giving you millions and billions of dollars that you could flitter away as you wished. But for our nation's middle class, lower middle class, and poor that don't have the ability to absorb increasing energy costs, the cap and trade bill would have been devastating. And that's why when John Dingell was asked, he responded about the cap and trade bill, he responded something to the effect that it's not only a tax, it's a great big tax, and it will unfairly hit the poor, and he was not going to bring that bill out of committee. So Speaker Pelosi at that time took whatever actions were required to remove him as chair and replace him with Henry Waxman. And Chairman Waxman made clear, we don't need your votes. We don't want your input. So we don't care what you want in the health care bill. Joe Barton, it's the longest-serving Texan in the House right now, had indicated as a former chair of that same committee that it's interesting if John Dingell, the consummate professional and honorable man that he is, if he had been allowed to remain as chairman of that committee, he would have instinctively gotten Republican input into that bill and included things in the bill that Republicans would have had a hard time voting against, such that if he had been allowed to remain as chairman of the Energy and Commerce bill, John Dingell would have probably been able to get a bill through that would not even be taken up by this body to be repealed, ripped out by its roots. But hopefully that's what we're going to be able to do with the extremely partisan bill. There were groups that were telling Republicans, look, of course we're negotiating with the Obama administration. We've got to have a seat at the table. And I would tell them, not when you're on the menu. But there were groups like the Big Pharma, like American Hospital Association, the AMA, some of the health insurance businesses ended up getting behind it. Of course, AARP totally sold out retired folks because they were going to make hundreds of millions, billions, perhaps more than they would have without Obamacare being passed. They had no interest in supporting a bill like I proposed that would have ended any need for a senior citizen to ever have to pay for supplemental insurance on top of Medicare. They would have been totally covered. But I didn't realize at the time I asked them to support it in 2009 that the year before they had made, I think, over $400 million or so in profit as a nonprofit organization on getting their members to buy their insurance that they had sponsored and put their mark of approval on. So anyway, there were people that were going to make a lot of money, but I could see that in the end it would probably spell the doom of the pharmaceutical industry. Yes, it would be years down the road. Yes, there would be executives at pharmaceutical companies who would see massive billions of dollars come in, more than would have otherwise. And yes, they would likely take their golden parachutes and their millions in severance and retirement and be gone before they were relegated to perhaps producing medications without getting reimbursement for research and development. This is the way the whole Obamacare thing would have eventually played out. And still, they got on board with Obamacare because they were going to make short-term extra billions of dollars. So having all of that in mind, as it's all appeared to me. It's just been astounding to be here yesterday and hear all the comments about the inability to have open debate. And I also know I've talked to numerous friends across the aisle who were greatly troubled over the last 6 years. Actually, the Office of Congressional Ethics was started by Speaker Pelosi. You're allowed to file complaints without anybody knowing who filed the complaint. The OCE is then able to go after a member of Congress and start demanding things that they could not possibly be entitled to under the Constitution if a member of Congress were getting due process. And, you know, I haven't been run through the ringer like so many have, but when you set up a process like that and you have the Office of Congressional Ethics set up, they have no one at all to whom they're accountable. No one. And they are encouraged, even if they file the complaints themselves, to enable them to continue to grow. From the little office they had over here in the Longworth building, I'm told they have a massive amount of space in one of the big federal buildings now, and they continued to grow. Apparently they were offended that their budget was cut and they were put under the Ethics Committee so that they would have some accountability. And there were an awful lot of great people, good friends across the country that did not know about how unconstitutionally they had been acting. I mean, more abusive even than the IRS at times, from the reports of some of my colleagues to me of what they'd been through. And, you know, I stand here, Mr. Speaker, as a judge who's had to look people in the eyes and sentence them to death, something is never taken lightly. I may be the only person here in Congress who has ever looked someone in the eye and sentenced them to death and been appointed as counsel against my wishes to represent an indigent defendant on appeal from a capital murder conviction and a sentence of death, and was able appropriately to have his case reversed and to save his life as the law should have been. So I feel rather strongly, yes, people should be accountable, but they must have due process. And that is not what is provided for by the OCE. So wonderful people, including our incoming president, were not aware of just how crazy the abuses have been. One of the members telling me yesterday that he was out about $500,000 in attorney's fees responding to ridiculous demands, and still never got to know who the accuser was. You don't get to necessarily even see what the specific complaint is. So we didn't do a good job of educating people of how grossly unfair the OCE process could be. But it needs everybody in Congress, judiciary, executive branch, everybody needs someone to whom they're accountable. And that would include the OCE. So we've got to do something about this, but we do need to go about it in an appropriate way to make sure that, once again, justice is done. But when you hear ethics watchdog group, then immediately you think, gee, they're going to stop an ethics watchdog group? That's outrageous. And that's what I would think if I didn't know all the background. So it made for an interesting day yesterday. But I've been amazed, though, that some who have told me that they wanted to eliminate the OCE would stand up on the other side of the aisle and preach about ethics, apparently referring to the effort to place OCE and make them accountable under somebody for a change, in this case under the Ethics Committee, and would demagogue the issue in essence when really they had been mistreated by the OCE, according to what I've been told by them in the past. So I think if we can just set the politics aside and work together for appropriate due process, then we could have a bipartisan group that could work something that would create due process, would make people accountable. So when you have somebody with $90,000 of cold, hard cash in their freezer, there is accountability. In that case, it was a crime, and it needed to be addressed. So there does need to be accountability. And on the same, by the same token, we have friends here. Saw my friend Steve King at the back just a moment ago. And we feel strongly that when a judge, a federal judge, intentionally refuses to go along with what they know the Constitution says, that ought to be an impeachable offense. They're not keeping their oath, and that's as offensive as anything is when it comes from a judge. They ought to be able to impeach a judge like that. And I don't think we've done enough impeachment of judges who have violated their oath. Yeah, we were removing a judge who had committed sexual assault. Well, that should have been a no-brainer, but that took literally an act of Congress to eventually get that done. And another judge, it was not till we actually impeached him for his terribly inappropriate actions, not bringing up, suppressing information when he was being investigated for being a judge, a federal judge, from his days as a state judge. Apparently, as a state judge, he didn't have a problem. If tuition was due for his son, just send somebody to one of the law offices that you often appoint and fill up the envelope with a bunch of cash and use that to pay your son's tuition. And that didn't seem to be a problem for this judge. And those are all things that should have been appropriately taken into account before he was ever made a federal judge. But I see my friend here on the floor. We'd be interested in having me yield, as I would certainly be more than pleased to do that, for such time as he may consume.
Well, thank you to my friend, Mr. Gohmert here. I was, listening to your remarks on a couple of these topics here. They're very important. He led off with the situation with the sit-in that occurred here on this House floor last year, some months ago, and I found that to be very appalling for the decorum, for the honor, for the history. All the things are important about conducting ourselves in a society where order is needed in order to conduct business. And so this House floor was not treated with that respect that is necessary to have order, to have an honest debate, a debate that is constructive. When you have a sit-in like that, where basically the folks on the other side of the aisle, some of them, decided to take over the entire building outside of session, outside of the rules, where, as Mr. Gohmert mentioned, many rules were violated. I had the appalling experience of walking on the floor just a few minutes after they concluded their sit-in, and honestly, the garbage that was laying on the floor, I saw food crumbs, old newspapers, magazines, a couple blankets. They didn't even pick up after themselves. They expected the staff of the building to pick it up and haul it off for them because their Occupy Wall Street moment was over with. So this is not the 60s. This is not the hippie era. This is the United States House of Representatives. So this week, rules were proposed that when you violate rules in such a fashion, where videotaping was going on, or live video, periscoping they call it, was occurring, basically bootlegging them to the American public via C-SPAN, which I'm a little annoyed with C-SPAN actually playing along with the violation of House rules of piping this out the way they did. I mean, if you want to have a protest out on the front lawn, fine. That's within the rights of free speech, the First Amendment and all that. You don't do it in violation of the rules of a fairly, some might say, sacred place, this House floor, the way that happened then. And so for them to be piping it out live that way, I found to be completely wrong. There's those folks that might say, well, this is all First Amendment right. Not in violation of the decorum of the House rules. So I'm glad Mr. Gohmert brought that up. And rules are put in place this week to address that. If people are going to violate the very House rules that help us keep order and do business of the American public, we lost part of, I think, 3 session days that could have been grinding out the important business of the people that the people expect of this country. We lost that session time. Indeed, had to come in here, and the speaker and whoever was introducing legislation that day yell over the process here to do things in order for the House. I find that appalling. It isn't very mature, and I think with some of the penalties that are put in place by the rules this week, there'll be a little more accountability for that. No.
Well, and reclaiming time briefly, I recall being told when that was going on and after it happened that Republicans should not respond, and that we were assured that people who violated the rules back then would be punished. Well, adopting rules now, specific penalties, don't really punish people that violated those very rules last year. And so I'm surprised that there is any complaint at all, since basically it means people who violated the rule with such abandon would complain about inserting a specific penalty now, meaning they got a free one. They didn't even get probation. They got nothing. They got pardoned, basically. So perhaps it's not too late for those that feel like putting a penalty in place now is unfair. I don't think it's too late. It's not unusual to have punishment assessed in a felony case 6 months or more after an event. So, perhaps if they think this is unfair, then we ought to have ethics hearings on what happened back then. I haven't heard of the OCE, by the way, taking any action on such widespread abuse that didn't require great investigation. All you needed was footage that was being streamed out from the very violators of the rules. So it should have been an easy thing to pursue if OCE were really that interested in making sure our rules were not violated. I yield to my friend.
I appreciate that. It wouldn't be inappropriate to bring that up with OCE, since OCE is a hot topic this week. The accountability goes both directions. And so with some of the issues we've heard our colleagues talk about with unjust charges that can be brought from anywhere out of the blue against a member of the House without justification, without even a due process for that member to have a chance to address directly what that charge is, and then have their name run through the newspaper, giant headlines, and maybe a year worth of investigation. When you see it, congressmen being investigated, well, that's an ugly headline. It can be used and manipulated for political purpose. When it might be a trumped-up charge, it could be something that has no merit. And many times, talking to my colleagues that have faced this, hundreds of thousands of dollars of cost to them for attorney's fees, their reputation besmirched by this, when really an investigative process that is open with oversight. Now, did we have the perfect piece of legislation in the rule this week? No, probably need a little more time to be aired out a little more widely, and it was withdrawn after at least getting the idea out on the table. And so I'm proud of my colleagues. They're going to take this up and work through it this year in a bipartisan fashion, get the input on that to make some needed reforms to the OCE so that we have an ethics process that is fair to the members, but also, obviously, enforces ethics for this House that are needed and clearly demanded by the public and us, because we're talking here tonight about a decorum, a code, a process that our House is to be conducted by. So that sit-in is one extreme. The other one is charges that are, in many cases, absolved months later without giant headlines, but are not even sometimes an oops or an I'm sorry for a trumped-up charges being brought up against somebody that would affect them negatively in their ability to serve their district or to fend off the huge costs of legal matters that they have to go through. So, you know, there is so many of my colleagues here strongly care and want to have a strong ethical process in this place, but there needs to be accountability and balance to it, and that's what we're all looking for, is accountability with OCE and our ethics committee, who in a bipartisan fashion can weed through all these processes. So I think we will get to that, and for those that are concerned about this country, around this country, that that some here want to get rid of that, the ethics process, that's absolutely couldn't be farther from the truth, because we all demand that with the code of conduct of this House on the floor and off of our members.
Yeah, well, I thank my friend, Mr. Lamalfa, for great insights.
Appreciate it.
Such truth. Thank you. Well, I also was just advised this afternoon that the EPA, apparently in accordance with some frenzied effort to have this administration put as problematic regulations in place to stifle the economy, stifle and skyrocket further costs of energy. The EPA has apparently given notice to oil and gas operators that they have 60 days to comply, and one such operator in Texas was saying the date on the notice, it was received December 15th, but he was out of the country. Somebody in the building accepted it, and the date for the day compliance kicks in January 18th, 2 days before Donald Trump, President-elect, would be able to strike such an arbitrary and capricious regulation down. And apparently they must have backdated the 60-day compliance before they ever got notice, saying you got till January 18th to comply. So what we've heard from so many small business owners, they get notices like this. You've all of a sudden got to comply. You got to give us all these records, those records, and it has cost them a fortune. It has stifled their ability to expand their business and hire more people and give more people opportunity and give more people opportunity to make more money than they had been making. Those have been so completely stifled by this administration, and I understand there was a Politico article glorifying the great efforts of the Obama administration in helping the economy, and to justify that took 1 quarter out of, I guess, 4 times 8, 32 quarters, and said, look at what they did in this 1 quarter, when actually, as I understood, if you take the whole term that we have numbers on and adjust the growth for inflation, President Obama's administration, his policies, his crony capitalism, helping people with no-bid contracts like IBM, giving $1.1 billion to this company to create mirrors to heat water, and however much it was, hundreds millions for Solyndra. There are just so many companies. They've squandered so much money. And yet, with all the money squandered, the economy grew, when adjusted for inflation, at about half the growth rate during the Jimmy Carter administration. Now, I understand this administration is extremely proud of what they accomplished, but I would humbly submit, Mr. Speaker, if your policies cause the economy to grow at half the rate of the Jimmy Carter administration, you've done more damage to the American people and the American economy than you've done good, and that's for sure. And that's at a time when scientifically we were having such breakthroughs that we found out we could actually be totally energy independent if this administration had not been spending so much money on, too expensive sources of energy and all the other things this administration supported. And we had a hearing in Chairman Rob Bishop's Natural Resources Committee, in our Oversight Subcommittee, a hearing on some of the abuses. And I know there are legitimate groups and businesses that have invested in this idea of having this fantastic carbon-free energy production out in California. And yes, it took an amount of acreage. I believe it was federal land that they were allowed to use, I believe, not certain. But I was intrigued. They were going to create all these mirrors that would reflect the sun's light in concentrated amounts toward 3 different towers, and the towers would then be superheated, superheat the water, turn the water to steam. Steam would turn turbines that would produce electricity. And if I recall correctly, they got $1.6 billion in government loan. And to help them make their loan payment, they got over $600 million in grants. And when I asked over this period of time that they'd been operating, how much of their $1.6 billion in government loans was paid back, I believe he said $6 million had been paid back from maybe $656 million that they got given to them by this administration. But we also came to find out that apparently there have been problems. One of the towers got superheated and was destroyed because of the massive sunlight reflected and damaging to where it wouldn't function. And because apparently they had squandered so much of their money, they had to find a cheap source, an extremely cheap source of energy, because they had contracts to supply a certain amount of electricity. And with the 3rd tower not in operation, they were not able to over 30% of the energy they had contracted to provide. And so they very quickly, cheaply, efficiently built a natural gas electricity production plant. And, wow, apparently it's working great. And, of course, anybody that studies natural gas understands, if they know what they're doing, that natural gas is an amazingly clean form of energy. And anyway, so now about 1/3 of the energy is being produced using natural gas, when the whole purpose of the massive $1.6 billion in the government-backed loan and the $656 million or so that was given to them was so because it was not going to be carbon-based at all. But it's not just the one problem, apparently, of the tower. This is out in an arid area where there's not much water. Well, they didn't need much water other than what they had in the towers, really. But what they didn't anticipate was something that I'm told operators, others in the area, refer to as flamers. Flamers, as I was given to understand, those are birds, perhaps some of them endangered species, that make the mistake of flying through the superheated beam of sunlight and immediately explode or burst into flame. And apparently, if you're a bird that gets superheated and explodes, bursts into flame, then masses of fluid keep covering the mirrors, which need to be kept clean. And normally you'd figure out in a desert or an arid area, you're not going to need to clean those mirrors very often, so you're not going to need much water. But then when it turns out you got all these flamers that super coat the mirrors, so they're constantly having to be re-cleaned, those poor birds that our nature-loving friends are exploding, it's running up the water bill as well, because, it's just not healthy to be exploding birds that fly through this superheated beam of sunlight. So 8 years of misguided policies have made probably a lot of Democratic millionaires, but the American public has suffered. And when adjusted for inflation, American people are on average worse off. I was surprised to see a video where the president actually admitted, he had actually acknowledged that in his administration, for the first time we're aware of in the history of the United States, 95% of the income in America went to the top 1% of the income earners. And I've read articles since then about actually even that 1% that was making 95% of the nation's income, they still weren't making, many of them, quite as much as they had before, because that's what happens when you hurt and throttle down an economy, as has happened. Haven't really adjusted. Of course, we've had the Fed that's had interest rates down to basically nothing, and it was clear they were doing everything they could to try to help the Obama administration's economy look better than it was. And now that people have started having hope because we have President-elect Trump and the policies are going to change dramatically, we're going to hopefully be completely rid of or as completely as possible, the crony capitalism. I know my colleagues here in the House, actually on both sides of the aisle, have made clear we want to stop crony capitalism, and I'm looking forward to that stopping once we get out from under this administration. So the economy's showing great signs. I've got people back home telling me they're starting to hire again just based on the hope and the promise. President Obama was supposed to bring hope and change, but all my constituents tell me, so many of them are left with after he's been president, was a little change left from what they had when he took office. But there's real hope, and people are gearing up to grow, and the economy should take off, and we should get energy independent. I expect President-elect Trump to keep his promises. He assured me personally he was going to, so I'm expecting great things. But just on that, the economy has started going up. On the assurance that President Obama would not be around any longer than January 20th. And as a result, now the Fed finally has started increasing interest rates because they don't have to artificially try to protect President Obama's reputation, poor economy. So send out regulations in such a capricious manner as they have, demanding that well operators start monitoring all their emissions, something to that effect. Looking forward to getting into it and just seeing how abusive the EPA has been as these oligarchs, but not to give a chance for true input into an arbitrary, capricious rule, not to give businesses a chance to get ready and to adjust. I mean, this is the kind of thing that has stifled so much growth and has sent so many high school and college graduates to their parents' home. I think there are a lot of people that voted for President Obama and were excited. I think it's unfortunate that so many people expressed that they voted for a president because of his skin color. And I'm not talking about Donald Trump. That they made a racist vote to vote for a man who was not white so they could feel good about voting for someone who was not white, where some of us, and it's one of the things for which I love Alveda King, Martin Luther King's niece. I mean, she believes in his dream. And the Americans that voted for Donald Trump, they believe that skin color should not matter. It's racist to vote for a candidate because of what his race is. Let's look at the character. Let's look at the qualifications. What have you built that you actually built that someone else didn't build for you? Let's look at those things and then make a determination rather than voting for someone just because of his race. Let's do as Martin Luther King Jr. Was so profound in saying, in looking forward to the day when people were judged by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. I'm looking forward to that day. That day has been set back tremendously. But it was a highlight for me back at the end of the fall to go back to my hometown of Mount Pleasant, Texas. I'd mentioned to a reporter some time back that I had hopes, though I didn't vote for President Obama, I had hopes that he would do for America what Coach Willie Williams did for our football team. And actually, I didn't say football team, I said our team. And liberals immediately put up an article saying that I said my basketball coach, my favorite coach, was African American. Apparently, liberals think if you're African American, you must be a coach of basketball because of your race, when actually it was the year before I went to the varsity. It was on the junior varsity, and I enjoyed playing for Coach Williams more than any coach I'd ever played for. And unfortunately, Coach Williams' memory is still intact. I haven't seen him in decades. But I was asked to come give a motivational talk for the team I played for, the Mount Pleasant Tigers. And it was such a treat being with those players. Morning, they'd had a rough year to that point. And I got to be with them on the field during the game. It was such a treat. Those young people were just inspirational. They fought hard, and some say it was the best game of the year. They won handily, a team from a bigger town than Mount Pleasant, and they even gave me the game ball. And as much as that meant to me, the real highlight was as we went into halftime, somebody told me that my old coach, back from, over 40 years ago, was up in the press box. And I got to go up, and I was so thrilled to see him. We hugged. smiled big as ever. And I was so elated in seeing him and talking to him. Somebody said when I got back here, when I said, I finally got to see Coach Williams after all these years, it's wonderful. Well, did you get a picture? I didn't even think about a picture. It's not a very good politician, but I didn't even think about a picture. But it is a shame his memory's so good because he remembered. We didn't have a lot of talent on that team. We didn't. But he made us so cohesive. We played well together. And we didn't have any outstanding talent, but we had a winning season, and it was a fun season because Coach Williams made it that way. And he inspired us together, and everybody got treated the same. Nobody got special treatment. Nobody got treated more harshly than anybody else. And we came together as a team. He remembered, he said, yeah, you guys didn't have much talent on your team, but you played so well together. Well, that was because of him. He brought us together. And I so hope that President Obama would do that for America. I didn't vote for him, but I thought it will be awesome if he can bring us even closer together. And now at the end of his administration, it is so grievous that America seems more divided than ever. I see an article here about more police officers again being shot in our U.S. cities. And heard the former police chief, I believe in Chicago this week, saying that Black Lives Matter was supposedly organized to try to stop killings of black, especially young men, and yet what Black Lives Matter has done is actually increase the number of people being shot. I was absolutely astounded to hear a quote from the president, a speech apparently he was making. I heard it on the radio when he was, or maybe he was giving an interview, but he was saying that we know, that cities that have more gun control laws just have less violence. That's called gaslighting. That's called creating a fiction and trying to push it across and make somebody that knows the truth think that they're crazy and that this alternate truth is really what's going on. The fact is that cities with the most gun control laws, like Chicago, for heaven's sakes, I mean, the hundreds of precious black lives that have been taken, been killed, the massive gun control laws have not helped Chicago. They've got a massive number of gun control laws there than we do in any city in East Texas. And yet nowhere in East Texas has that kind of violence at that percentage rate. It's insane. It's time to quit trying to gaslight the American people, convince them they're going crazy, and that what they know to be true is fiction. It's time to just have a truthful assessment of where we are. We need to follow the law. We need to have enforcement of our borders. We will continue to be the most generous nation in the world, not just in giving funds to help others, not just in giving lives of our citizens to help freedom for other countries like nowhere else in history, but also most generous in the number of visas and the number of people we allow to come into the United States and visit. And yet that generosity has been abused. And as the Border Patrol has said, every time we hear somebody in the government in Washington say anything about legalizing anything or anything here illegally, it is like a shiny object that draws even greater numbers illegally through our borders. And what is our Border Patrol ordered to do? Don't turn them back and prevent them from entering the United States. Oh, no. Let them step foot on American soil and then in-process them, and we'll ship them around different places. Although I saw an article in the last week where there were some aliens illegally here who were just dropped off at a bus stop. But have an article from Julia Edwards Ainsley, January 3rd, from Reuters. Trump team seeks agency records on border barriers surveillance. And it's fantastic. I mean, here they are trying to gear up, and yet they want to know information. They don't want to be gaslighted. They want to know what is the truth so that they can start making hard preparations for taking office on January 20th. Article December 30th from Paul Bedard from the Washington Examiner. The Department of Homeland Security says 94% of deportations are people illegally here, terror threats, gangbangers. The CBP, Border Patrol, reports assaults on border agents have skyrocketed 231% in 2017. So not only has this president's rules of engagement gotten about 4 times more Americans killed, our military members killed in Afghanistan in the same amount of time as Chief George W. Bush had, but in addition to the rules of engagement, getting our people killed 4 times faster than under Commander Bush, but also the assaults on our own agents have gone up 231% just in this year, in 1 year. We're getting our Border Patrol harmed. Another article from Chris Tomlinson, Breitbart, 600 underage migrants turn out to be adults. I mean, I've seen that in the middle of the night down on the border, people coming in, switching off Xeroxed indications they were going to use for their identification. This is who I am, and, you know, for whatever reason, they would look at their thing and switch out as to who was going to be whom. But they weren't able to vet those people, but they were still ordered to in-process them anyway. This article from Michael Patrick Leahy, December 7th, reported that Somali refugees were arriving in the United States at the highest rate ever in the first 2 months of fiscal year 2017, which would be October, November. So just astounding. When America was making very clear we need to protect American citizens. It's not just the people in this room, as we did yesterday, take that oath, but the president takes that oath. You know, you got cabinet members that take the oath, and yet they're not doing their jobs. And people are getting killed. 85,000 refugees under Obama, but less than 10 to the District of Columbia. So apparently it's, let's put these refugees in your backyard. We certainly don't want them in the Washington, D.C. backyard, apparently, according to this administration. And then, it's pretty amazing, but just 10 states resettled more than half of recent refugees to the United States, and naturally, way more than anywhere else was California and Texas. Daily Caller reported that the State Department claims no one used sham visas from fake embassy, and yet we have seen hundreds and hundreds of people that reports showed had been given citizenship by mistake when they were supposed to have been deported. Doesn't seem like a very innocent mistake when it's that egregious. But back in December, Washington Times reported Obama administration fails to check immigrants against FBI databases and approve citizenship anyway. The Afghan refugee program has not been totally successful. Report here, Afghan refugee in December was arrested for rape and murder of a top EU official's daughter. So apparently that was not working out so well. But that was in the country of Germany, where you have a like-minded leader in Angela Merkel who wants to defeat terrorism, as our president does, with love and compassion. Well, love is a stronger emotion than hate. Love can overcome evil, but when people are religiously dedicated to wiping another group of people off the planet for what they deem to be their holy God, those are people that have to be defeated. They are at war with you. You defeat them militarily, and that puts radical Islam back in a box until some other well-meaning fool like former President Carter, fine man, just foolish president, not demeaning his character, but he was just very foolish in citing the Ayatollah Khomeini as a man of peace, as he was so welcoming in the Ayatollah Khomeini taking over Iran. And that released radical Islam out of the box, gave them control of a major country military, and thousands and thousands and thousands of people continue to die because of that mistake. We know, going back to the early days of the United States, when so much of the federal treasury was used to pay ransom to get our sailors back who were being captured by radical Islamists in North Africa. And Jefferson couldn't understand why they kept attacking American boats. And he asked the Islamist who he was negotiating with, they kept attacking American ships. We're not a threat to you. We don't even have a navy. And reportedly, the response was, in essence, well, look, if we die attacking someone like you, we go straight to paradise. And Jefferson was amazed. He couldn't believe there was a world religion, or even people's interpretation of a world religion, that advocated that you could go to paradise for killing innocent people. Of course, they maintain they're not innocent because they don't believe exactly like the radical Islamists believe. But President Obama basically did the same thing with Libya. Gaddafi was not a good man. But since 2003, the reports were clear, as others in North Africa and the Middle East have reported. He was about the best friend that the United States had in helping fight terrorism in that area. And yet this administration took him out. Times on this floor, I and others were begging the administration not to take out Gaddafi, not to keep helping the rebels, not to keep bombing Gaddafi's troops until we knew how extensive Al-Qaeda was. We knew that at least a fourth of the, or a part of the people fighting were radical Islamists, but the administration went on and turned the country into chaos. Thank God, America.